So good morning, everyone. This is Juana Maria, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Um, I'm just so glad it's Friday. I don't know about all of you, but if you can hear me well, I know there's a couple of different options. People are calling in with our conference call number. So if you are calling in with our conference call number, please make sure to go ahead and mute your speakers. For those of you that are listening to us via broadcast through their computer, just know that you can use the different pods to ask questions and to interact and communicate. Highly recommend that. There's a lot of information we're going to be covering, so I think it's really useful to just kind of ask questions as we go along and collaborate with the different participants. So welcome. Yeah, a couple of things to cover before we start our webinar. Underneath the main PowerPoint, you'll notice we have a file share, and I've included the PDF version of the PowerPoint. So if you want to print this out and then take notes or however you want to keep up with the webinar, I also included a social media guide, and this is what we're compiling as we go along with the different webinars. So for those of you that have already participated in our first webinar, welcome back. Thanks so much for your interest and for coming. Next to the file share, you'll notice a Help Me Pod. This is where you give us a heads up if you can't hear something or maybe your computer's blowing up. We definitely would want to know so we can help you out and get you back into the webinar. And then on the right-hand side, you'll notice that you have a couple of different polling pods. And so this is just for us to kind of gather information and find out how we're learning and growing as we're going through the different series in the process of learning about social media. And so really good way for us to understand where all of you are coming from. Some of you are first-time participants, and so this is how we're gathering information. What I'd like to do now is move over and just introduce myself. So my name is Juana Maria. I'm the Business Services Coordinator with Illinois WorkNet located in Chicago. And today on our webinar, we have Natasha Telger as well with the Illinois WorkNet team in Springfield. So really wanted to welcome her, and as well as our DeVry team, and just take care of a couple of different housekeeping items. And someone is raising their hand. You will actually be muted until we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So offline and find out if there's an issue with your webinar. So David, if you have a question, please be sure to include it in the Help Me pod. Now, a couple of things. A lot of you are familiar with our webinars, and so you notice that there are two options. You can, if you've called in the conference line, you'll have the option to I would just encourage you to use the different chat pods. And we do post all of this information. Everything is archived, and so it is accessible to all of you after we have completed the webinar. If you notice on your left, to raise your hand, to clap, to disagree, to ask me to speak slower or louder. And this is how I get to monitor and get some feedback on the different kind of recap the polling questions that we captured for the last webinar and then go through a three-part section for our current webinar on basics of social media. WorkNet has now launched its social media page, and so you can find that on the business pathway under Develop. We have a channel called Social Media, and this is where you get to find all that information. So for instance, you'll notice creating a social media strategy is the first tab. You just click on that tab, it expands, you get all the webinar summary, you get to link to the videos. Maybe you want to share that with your staff on a different time and you weren't able to make it, or you need to catch up on some of the information or it went too fast, or or whatnot, definitely use these. Highly encouraged to use these as your guides to learning about social media. There's also a forum included, which is just a continuation of the collaboration that's going on within this webinar. So if you have questions, a lot of people here are beginners and a lot of people here are experts, and so is the forum feature on that page. So if you have a business pathway account or an individual's or even a workforce professionals account, just go ahead and log in, and then you have full access to a series of webinars in partnership with Javara University in really understanding how to use next webinar will be on the actual tools and how are we creating those accounts. Then alternatives to Twitter will be our April session, and then creating and managing your social media accounts will be our follow-up emails to let you know where everything is and how you can find it. The other part of this is I wanted to share just kind of a recap of our original webinar and some of the information we captured in the social media page. And so just to give you an idea of some of the different stats that were up there, and so we have that all posted for you. And for those of you that are joining us, I just wanted to really recap and others. And so this is the context of what we're talking about today. And to go over our what I want you to know is not to worry about taking all this in right this minute, because you can always go back, and more so this is just to serve as a guide for you. And so we will provide your webinar summary. We will put these examples on and to have an overview and understanding of what social media is. And so that's my plug for that. Taps back into the actual strategy that we created last month. And then after that, it's how do you make, so now that you've had this image put together, how do you make these connections? And then at the end, now that you've spent all this time making these connections, how pod, and that's for the technical questions and issues. And then on the left-hand side, you'll notice the chat pod, and I really encourage you to get very involved within. We'll the information that we're sharing with you today, we're building on that. And so we encourage you to come to the subsequent webinars to help you kind of go through the different options that we have. So with that said, if hopefully I've covered it all, we can start our first portion. And so with creating a program image, what we really wanted to share with you is the first part of a webinar is just presenting these resources on how you can develop your image, which means it will help you establish the kind of message and the way you interact with your users. And these are the things that we really need you to keep in mind as we're going through the webinar series, because it's going to get your wheels in motion, and hence the image, right? Very original stuff here. And 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 for you to kind of understand, okay, now that I have this image, and how am I using this image with what's available as social media resources? And so we'll eventually bring you back to this. And so you don't have to answer these questions now. These are just the things that you need to have in mind as we go through the different information throughout the webinar. So going through, here we go. So the first part of that, and this is pretty much the main component, is, and ringing back to the first webinar, is being transparent or being authentic, and what that actually means. And what we want to encourage here is for you to be deliberate about the image you put out there, because you're going to spend a lot of time gathering a following, putting messages out there, having people that would want to listen to you or come to you as an expert. And so, this image will also need to be maintained. So for instance, one of the questions that we asked, and this is with Natasha and myself in developing even Illinois WorkNet's social media strategy, and we're all learning together here, is involvement. So Natasha, would you want to jump in there on any ideas with that?
Right. Well, with our, uh, uh, for example, with our Facebook page, with being transparent and authentic and human, we felt it's important to be out there where the people are and making ourselves available for them to interact with us. So depending on, we do have a page, some fan pages on Facebook for each of our different types of customers. We have individuals, businesses, and workforce professionals primarily. So we do have information that's available to them. Um, it's customized, specifically for those audiences. We also have a LinkedIn page or a group so that followers or other members can join that as well. And then we also have Twitter. So the idea is that we have all these different places that we're using right now, and how are we going to be able to maintain these, because they, we do have to provide messages out to these all these all of our customers in these areas. And so there are resources that are available, and Anwana's going to get into these specifically in a future webinar. But don't be afraid of that, because there are resources that are available out there to help you streamline this process. So I think once you put together your strategy and you keep these things in mind as you're looking at some of the best practice examples that are out there, it is time, there is effort, but there are ways you can streamline that process.
Exactly. And then, and especially if you start it right the first time, so for instance, the way we're being authentic is we talk about workforce development within our image. That's what we're putting out there. We're not pretending to be, diabetes specialist or something. So that's how, so once, if you can establish a realistic image, it'll be easier for you to maintain. And so I think that's a big part of it. Another part of that, actually, and I'll move over to our next slide, is, as mentioned before, right, in our previous webinar, is what kind of actual visual image are you going to put out there, right? So logos, pictures, or avatars. And the reason this really matters is because they each have a different approach. And depending on if you're doing it as you, the individual who just started a store, or you, the organization, or you, the program, um, or agency, all the various different images throw out various different impressions, and impressions are a very big deal with this, and so it requires a different approach. And so, for instance, and this is a question, I think this is really good for us as Illinois WorkNet. Natasha, the last question is, what would happen if this image or individual leaves? So for instance, we started all of our Facebook stuff and our Twitter. What happens if, one of us leaves? What would happen to our image?
Well, one of the things that what we're fortunate with Illinois WorkNet is that we do have our logo that's branded. So within our pages, we've definitely included the Illinois WorkNet Center logo, but to try to keep it on a more of a personal level, because human side of it, we have used some of our images, some of our people that are within our marketing materials, because Illinois WorkNet is about connecting people to jobs and to other opportunities, so we don't want to lose that. So we have included people from our own marketing materials on our pages as well. One of the nice things about that is if something happens that one of our team members is no longer with us, then we don't have anything, we don't have just that person, for example. We don't have just Juana or just Natasha as the face of Illinois WorkNet. It's those consistent images that were and pictures that were already or within our own marketing materials.
So those are not our pictures, basically. That's what you're telling them.
Yes, exactly.
Well, the ones on this PowerPoint, there are pictures. That's what we actually look like, but not our different. So it depends on how you want to brand yourself. I guess that's what Natasha is trying to say. And so moving on to the other part is creating a legacy, right? And so once you've got your image and you've got your pictures or your logos up there, um, this slide is about creating a legacy, and I realize that this sounds like this pretty grand idea, but think of leaving a legacy as a social media term for developing a brand. So it's no longer the product, like Coca-Cola or shoes or whatever, that item that people have developed brands for, but it's actually you or your organization. You're becoming the brand. The type of message you're throwing out there is what you're branding. And so how will you brand yourself? What impressions or perceptions will you create? And if you think about it, the internet can actually be quite forgiving. While you can put things out there, you could definitely take them down. But just keep in mind, and for instance with tweeting, if you put a tweet up, right, and then you're like, oh no, this is incorrect or whatever, and you take it down, you don't know if someone's retweeted. Some people are on this stuff. They're just like 2 seconds later, they're all over the place. Um, so be mindful of the information that you're putting out there, and know that once it's out there, it's out there. Whether or not you delete it, it's in the universe of cyberspace. And so the same thing goes with your you want to make sure that you're maintaining that image with appropriate questions with appropriate images and messages. And for those of you that have questions, please make sure to use the chat pod. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so I encourage you to do that. Natasha, what would you say along the lines of leaving a legacy? How would you say we've been consistent with our messages?
Well, we do have our audiences for individuals, businesses, and workforce professionals. So, really the focus is on helping people find jobs, preparing them to find jobs, and, finding services to help them, keep their jobs. And on the business side, it's about recruiting, training, and developing their business. So all of our messages we need to send out there need to be along those lines, or some other resources, or connecting them to other partners or great resources, best practices, something that can help them, um, help them to meet their employment goals. So in other words, I wouldn't put out there, that I was, going out for a jog, or I was, going to do something on a personal level. I want to make sure I stay within, the personality.
No matter how cool they are, right? Very cool. So yeah, so definitely. So you want to really, and this is a great segue for the, kind of the next point, but you want to keep it consistent, right? So once you've established yourself as that diabetic specialist, you don't want to turn out, that you're really, a manufacturing developer. I don't know. I mean, something really random, right? Um, so what you post to your audience needs to be clear and consistent, meaning if my image is Illinois WorkNet and it's about workforce development and the resources available, it wouldn't be a good idea for me, as Natasha mentioned, to talk about my 5-mile run. So making a short list of what you will talk about using social media is a good way to ensure that you stay consistent. And Natasha, what would you say what are the topics that we've decided to talk about within our
Well,
program image?
mostly, new releases, things that would be of interest to our customers. When we're getting ready to put out our new pathway, or just release some information that would be helpful, to our workforce professionals and assisting their customers. Those types of resources are the things that we have been adding, on our Facebook pages for any upcoming or any events that we have. We're going to
It's a really great example for our Facebook part of this. But and also realize that you're going to have a lot of different things that you do, right? So for instance, we have a lot of upcoming launches for our disability pathways, for WeWorks, where people share their stories. And although it's different, we're putting it out there and we're launching these ideas, it's still within that main component of workforce development. That's the point, is just to stick to what you do and do it in a way where people can follow. And then we'll talk a little bit about that. But the bottom line in creating a program image is to really be transparent. Decide what your message or approach is by choosing the appropriate um, actual image. And then decide on how you want to brand yourself. How are you going to leave that legacy? And lastly, how are you going to keep it consistent so once you have it up there, really great questions putting up here in the chat pods, and we'll definitely get into those later. So moving on to the second part of the webinar is really talking about making those connections. So once you've developed your strategy and your plan, how do you connect and where do you connect? And so this is just going to be a really very basic social media tools guide. And keep in mind, our next webinar is actually going to show you how to do all of this, go through the demonstrations and all that. So this is more for you to know what's out there and for you to start thinking and doing your homework and learning about these different types of tools. And so, and especially because, in the last webinar, 85% of our participants information online and not knowing if people are getting it or not. Feedback is really important, and the best, I think, feature with all of these tools is you get instant feedback, and you'll realize you'll get good and bad instant feedback. So you need to be prepared for that. Now, the first part of this is email. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, why are we starting off with email? And it's actually a very important part of social media because it's the basis or foundation. And so you need email to start all of these things. And I also wanted to include email because it also contributes to your image. And a lot of you may not know, but for instance, there was an article on NPR that talked about a survey that found that if you have a Gmail account, and you're like applying for an IT job or something, it's is a bonus. It's highly looked upon versus if you had something like AOL. And it's not that one is better than the other. There's just, there's always that new thing. And so just be aware that there is perception. The email is just a starter's guide for those of you that maybe want to learn how to use it more efficiently, or different tips that they have. And this is for every different email server you can use. I mean, there's tons and tons of options. And also within your guide, I've included a bunch of different links to articles that talks about, what are the top rated email programs that you can use, why, who likes what, learning to make it really, really more efficient in your interactions. The second part of this is actually microblogging. And a lot of you may think of, well, what are you talking about? What is microblogging? And the most popular version of microblogging is actually Twitter. And what is important to think of when it comes to Twitter is think of it as instant messaging to the world. And we've used this before in the previous webinar, but it's what you're doing in less than 120 characters. And you get a lot more. You get about 140 characters, but you want to be able to have people retweet. So that means take your message and share it with their followers. And that's how you're building your brand. This is how you right? So use it to make your announcements. Use it to post, these headliners, right? Answer questions. Use it to connect with your different individuals or send your updates. And what I've done, and this is something that I highly recommend that you look through, is I've included links, and these are all live links. So if you download the PowerPoint or if you download the guide, you can go through all of these different links and really start exposing you to what's out there. And so if you notice with the Twitter guide, there's 6 pods on there. I've only included the first 2, and so that's the basics of Twitter and then building your community. And these are some really, really great links for you to know on, how to use this stuff. Because I think a lot of people are just kind of intimidated by the vastness of everyone's using Twitter. What does it mean? What does it do? And it's really not that hard, and you won't know that until you start playing, right? Until you start actually experiencing it for yourself, start talking to people, start asking questions. And then the second part of that is learning how to build your community, learning how to find people on Twitter, learning how to make it effective and not so much as sending out, spending hours and hours online. So I highly recommend you look through this stuff and then be prepared for the next webinar and come armed with your questions, right? The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it, because we'll sit there and we'll go through all the different features and show you how to get this started for yourself. Um, so that's
And
Twitter.
also with that, Juana,
Hmm.
for example, with Twitter, Dee Reinhardt, she's participating today, and she's always, we've noticed over the past few webinars that she just, tells us exactly, like she says, I'm tweeting right now about this. So she's sending out just a really quick message to let everybody know about the different resources that are available, something that her customers or her followers might be interested in. So it just takes a couple of minutes or even less than that. But once you get used to making those tweets, I think it just becomes like a second nature to you.
Right, and even with what Dee posted here, she responded to Steve and said that she spends about an hour a day, um, and and this is really, really, and you'll learn how to link this all together, but I'm sure in the beginning it took Dee forever, just like all of us, and the more and more proficient you become, the better and better you are with your time. And even with Dee's example, for instance, like she's throwing out these headliners, right? And she's driving traffic. You take Twitter and you drive traffic to your announcements, your job post, to your website, to your event, you know, and you're bringing people in, and you're learning to connect with them in a different way. People that you wouldn't know, would be interested. So thank you so much for that, Natasha. Yeah. So the other part of all of this is social networking, and I've split it up into 2 different pages. And so I did Facebook and LinkedIn. And what you need to know about Facebook is it's the social version of connecting, and I have it labeled, and this is from Mitch's conversation, but the online cocktail party. So Facebook is the place where you get to be human. That first question was, how am I authentic? How am I human? This is where you get to be human. It doesn't mean you don't get to be professional. I mean, we all have our separate personal Facebook pages and our program pages, and this is where you get to be around, kind of like Natasha was talking about earlier, and I'll let her get onto that. But just be around and show people that you are human, that we have events, that there's people that come to these events. We're doing more than just sending out links, right? And so a place for you to be able to interact. So use Facebook to create groups or fan pages, become members, follow other people's examples, and learn how to build your own fan base, or learn how to post, or um, or even learn how to create. I mean, back to Dee, not to make it all about Dee today, but she helped me do like these custom tabs that I was just like, oh my God, this is rocket science. But once you get started and once you start asking questions, it's really not that hard. And so you just need to get out there and start really working on the different options that you have. So what I've done here for Facebook is just included a couple of links, right? So this is a Facebook guide, and I've included the first 2. So the first of it is just the basics, so groups versus fan pages. And this is um, quite different because certain things are only applicable to the fan pages, certain things you can only add to your group, certain things you need your profile for, right? And then finding and adding the different apps available, and also managing your Facebook wall. Something that we came up with, Natasha and I, when we first started, is we were getting a lot of weird, you know, inappropriate friends, I would say, Natasha. I don't know how you would want
I would agree.
to classify that. And so you have to be very mindful of what kind of options you're giving people and how they're posting on your page. And I mean, there was even a case study with like M&Ms where they started their group and people were making inappropriate comments about the green M&Ms, you know. And so you really want to start doing your homework, finding out how all this stuff works, and and then start, finding other people, finding their best practices, and throwing it out there. Um, I don't know, Tasha, would you want to add something to the Facebook part?
I just think of when we say online cocktail party, it's still remain professional, but again, this is just Facebook is more of a social aspect of way of networking. Um, Maybe people have let their guard down a little bit, but over, as what you're going to get into in just a minute, like LinkedIn is a good networking tool as well, but it's more of it's more professional, I guess you
Right.
could say.
And actually, if you don't mind, I'll just switch over to that one
Hmm.
so they see what we mean. So LinkedIn, right? And think of LinkedIn as your online Rolodex. And back to what Natasha was saying, this is very different than Facebook because, for instance, with Facebook, you can have like 3 million friends, and you don't have to know any of them because you'll just add them on, and there you are. You've just become so popular. But with LinkedIn, when you find people or you want to be introduced to people, you have to know their email addresses. So these have to be real people that you're connecting with to build this network. And I mean, I highly recommend LinkedIn. And actually, there's been a lot of feedback from the different chambers and all that on, really encouraging people to become proficient because this is the way to go these days. So, from the different experts and the different companies posted on there, there's 40 million members. That's including the Fortune 500 companies within the 170 different industries that they're representing. So with LinkedIn, you use it to find people within your network, within your professional network, within your educational background, within your interests, right? There's different groups there as well. And then be introduced to them if you don't know them. If you have connections, it's kind of like that. It's like the Kevin Bacon movie. I don't know what that was called, 6 Degrees of Separation or something. Um, but it's a place where you can collaborate with qualified professionals and think of it as like your casual background check. You can't lie about a company you've worked for because everyone is connected within that company. So you can't pretend like you work there if none of those people know you, right? So, you can't make up that you worked at Illinois WorkNet because there's only a few of us here. We'd know if you were here. So it's a place for you to really connect with people, but at the same time, they have this LinkedIn's Answers feature where you as an individual professional, right, can post, can showcase what you know. And so, for instance, people will post questions and say, how do I create a social media policy, right? And then you have social media experts all over the world on LinkedIn. And so you post that question and then you'll get bombarded with 50 different answers. And this is how individuals get to showcase their expertise. And at the same time, this is how you get free answers and you get to start collaborating. And I think this is a huge part of us becoming a community of users. The world is becoming very small. And the better and more proficient we become at doing this, the more that we can learn to connect and just do things in a better way. And so what I've included here is just the starter guide for LinkedIn. Really, really simple stuff. Go online and create a profile that actually represents you because people will send jobs. They'll start using this as a way to start searching for candidates, for instance. Add a profile photo that, isn't your Halloween picture. um, as well as, and this is definitely a project. I mean, even putting my resume up there, it's overwhelming. it's a lot of information to kind of really make sure you're capturing properly. But then once you've got that up, ensure your connections are actually representing your network so that you can actually leverage that network after that. So just a couple of different links. Please feel free to go and play and add us as our Illinois WorkNet LinkedIn group. We'll post different discussions up there, and it's just a different audience of people that are business-minded on there and really trying to look for solutions or, connections to different things that they may need help with. Um, so moving on. So what I wanted to do is just so with the social media and the different tools, think of Twitter as like your headliner. This is how I'm going to get people back into my, whatever you're tweeting about. Think of Facebook as a way to be around. Just like Illinois WorkNet, we're using our Facebook account as a way to be human. To because we work on a virtual portal. So we're using a different type of portal to show people like, hey, we exist. We do more than help with policy or build content or do all these different programs. And then think of LinkedIn as a way to connect professionally. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Natasha.
Well, I know it's just, it may seem like a lot of time that you're going to invest in, and the next slide will show you a PowerPoint that Juana goes through that talks to you more about. It's a resource that's available to explain, kind of how much the resources that you're going to use to get started, how much time you're going to spend, maintaining this. But I think what it really comes down to is, understanding what your goal is and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And we're just going to beat that dead horse over and over on that one because that's really what it's about, right? So now that we've gone through all the social media tools that can help you get started, and we've justified why social media is good, right? Now this last segment is all about the impact of your effort, the impact of all of those connections you've made and interactions. And so return on engagement is just a play on words for return on investment. And this is really, really important because you need to be aware that social media is not free. It does have a cost. It costs time, and for us, for instance, it costs a lot of time. It costs money for those of you that are investing in it. Start working this into your plan on making it as effective and efficient as possible. And so um, based on what Natasha was mentioning, the first thing you really need to do, and this is the over-encompassing return on engagement, but define your goals. We'll go through some of the metric tools you have available to you. They're free. Really, really easy stuff to use that'll just really spell it out for you in the sense of even how to link it all together, and not as in LinkedIn, the site, but as in linking all the different social media tools you have and how all of that works together. Some of the product suites for those of you that are business owners and trying to figure out how to make social media sell your products or use it to become more profitable. And then lastly, really going into, okay, now that I have all this data, what does it mean? And so all of that kind of gets tied in together. Another thing I wanted to throw out there is, as I was preparing for this webinar, I found this awesome, awesome PowerPoint, which is one hysterical because I find return on engagement is kind of an intimidating topic, right? Even the term itself is like, oh my God, what does that mean? But Oliver Blanchard actually put together something that's really funny, includes Planet of the Apes, so you know it has to be good. And he has such a great way in layman's terms to break it down on what you need to do to really gain an understanding and be successful and proficient. So I highly recommend that you check that out. The link is at the bottom. If you want, I could resend all that stuff. And then please, I encourage you to follow him on Twitter. He has all types of interesting facts that he throws out there. So moving on. So the first part of return on engagement is really defining your goals, and you'll understand this in a little bit on why it's so crucial, but you need to have a place to actually measure against, right? So you need to draw that line in the sand and know what you want to accomplish. And defining your goals is where you start creating, that difference. Like, okay, now this is, before social media, and this is after social media. What happened here? And so really understanding that this is like the do or die of the measurements that you start coming up with, because now you're going to start collecting data. You have to have something to compare it to. Um, the second part of that is actually some of the different metric tools. And I'm sure a lot of people, just the idea of analytics, you're like, oh my God, I mean, how, this is just way far beyond my head. And the truth is, it's really not that really not to rely on the numbers, but to know what they mean. And some of the free social media measuring options are Google Analytics or Hootsuite. And what that does is you put all of your different tools that you're using through these analytic options, and it gives you some amazing feedback. For instance, on your Twitter, who's listening to your tweets, so who's clicking on your tweets, how old are they, where are they coming from? So this is how you fine-tune your message, and this is how you start understanding your audience and connecting. So it's no longer you throwing information out there, but you really understanding and receiving what their reality is, or what even your perception is with your image. Um, Another part of this is with tips you've shared on job postings, for instance. And so sentiment analysis is also very important, because not all comments are created equal. And you don't, this isn't Hollywood where all publicity is good publicity. Like, you really want to make sure you're maintaining your credibility within the people that are following you. And so viral heat is a great way to go. Sentimental metrics. Just go through the different things that are available. And by all means, I encourage you to keep searching on your own and finding better ones. These are just some of the top ones that came up, and really find out what people think of you, and how to use that information to make your social media image more successful. I've also thrown in a part on product suites, and this is for those that are entrepreneurs and selling things, and not necessarily organizations. Um, and so this is a way for you to kind of measure your sales and use all of that. And also, yeah, definitely what Dee posted, Mashable.com, is awesome, and I've used that actually throughout all of this, and I've posted it on my works cited. A great way for you to really, all the how-tos. Is just really making that data usable. So this is taking you back to the beginning, right? Because now that you've had that line drawn in the sand of where am I taking this image, or where am I taking my messages, or how are these people following me, um, you want to be able to have it something, to measure it to your goals. So have you gotten there? Is this what I said I wanted to do? Is this what I, quote unquote, have accomplished? And so the bottom line for ROI is define your goals because you need something to measure against. Use the metric tools and learn to decipher what those numbers actually means. So are you sending out the right messages? Do you have a good strategy? Do you need to regroup? Maybe you're not throwing it out there to the right people. How is your customer service? Are you being able to address these problems that may come up? And how are your and then sorry, and then the second part of that is know your business options and the tools available for you if you're running a business. And the last bit of that is just using the data that you have available and comparing it to what you've gathered to know that you've established your goals, to know that you've gotten to where you said you wanted to be. So that's kind of our webinar summary. Natasha, do you want to add maybe anything to this that I may have missed?
No, I would just say that with today, just to think about in this first section we have up here is these are the main components, to think about, keep in mind. If you're not already an active user or very familiar with these resources, then, just get involved and start, looking at it from a customer's perspective, if nothing else. Getting in there and trying to understand, why are, how are people doing this? What is the draw? What are the positives? What do people get out of it? Why is this so popular? Especially if you're not familiar with any of these resources. And sometimes the best way to learn about it is just to experience it, just to jump in there, and not to say you have to set up something for your company or for your organization, but you as a person, as a consumer, go ahead and start looking at these things and trying to just work through and figuring them out. Because then you can keep in mind you have your main components. Now you're starting to understand the different resources that are available and how they work and how they interact and kind of what are the little specialties for each of the different types of social media. But then you can also take a look at it from your organization standpoint, and really work on what are you trying to accomplish with this? Or you're an organization and you're trying to recruit people, you're trying to make draw more people, sell more products, or are you providing a service for individuals and you want to make yourself available to them? Um, so as a follow-up, we can post examples for you to take a look at. So as you set up your accounts, get involved, take a look at these examples because there are some really good examples out there, and think about it keep the main components in mind, and think about how would you see your organization doing this? How would you see you fitting into this?
No, and I think that's very good. And just to kind of build upon what Natasha was saying, for our next step, and in talking with Natasha, we wanted to give you some solid things to take away from this other than the actual guide. And the first step to that is really experiencing it, like Natasha said. Start your own accounts, even if it's just you as the individual, just to check it out and see what it's about so that people that will eventually interact with you, you'll know what it looks like. You'll know what the kind of options that they have. And we'll definitely do this. We're going to keep building with the tools I've highlighted and start showing you how to start these accounts, how to build your following, how to do all of this. And then, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. And then the second step to this is to really do your homework. And I can't stress this enough because, it's important. I know that this takes a lot of time, but it's important. Social media is here whether we like it or not. So either we learn to make it useful and make it useful to what we do, or we're going to kind of get left behind because this is the way it's kind of going in the direction that it seems the rest of the world is going. So become familiar with the resources available, watch the different webinars, and then use these PowerPoints as your guides. We're not expecting you to take this all in today, but you'll go and try it, and then you'll come back and be like, oh, that's what she was talking about. Also, take a look at the different pages we're fans of, and we've put KCDD, DEE, um, and Think Beyond the Label is two examples that we've used that they're just stellar. They're doing a really great job, and this is a way to kind of learn and see if what they're doing works for you. Can it work for you? Is this something that, and take it back to the webinar and then come prepared with questions. As I mentioned before, the more you know, prepare yourself. The more you do your homework, the more you put in it, the more you'll get out of it. So come armed with questions and say, okay, now that we're going through this Facebook thing, kind of like the question Steve asked, is it free? Is there any cost to this? It's kind of like the internet answer. The internet isn't free, but email is quote unquote free, but you're paying for your service, right? So it's kind of the same thing. No, there is no cost to start any of these accounts. The cost is your time. The cost is your resources, is energy or staff, and the cost is your time. So these are some of the things that we want you to walk away with and just start thinking about these. We're going to switch over to the actual Q&A part of this in a minute. Um, But before we do that, I just wanted to touch upon our upcoming webinar. So the first session was creating a social media strategy. The second one, which is today's session, is just on the basics to give you an overview, right? And then we're going to really dive into the actual social media tools. So we'll give you the user guides, the tips, demonstrations for Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn accounts. And then we'll really touch upon a couple of the other things that we think you should know about. Um, so additional ways for you to expand within your social media effort. And so RSS feeds and wikis and blogs and how all of that can be used within the working world. So now that we've gone over, we have about 10 minutes left for our Q&A, and I just wanted to give you an idea. So those of you that have called in, you can just star pound to get in queue for the actual questions that we're answering. Sorry, for the questions that we're going to answer, and then it'll just transfer over to the next person. For those of you that are listening via our broadcasted webinar, just go ahead and use the pods that we've provided. So I'm going to switch over to a different view, and the Q&A session will begin. Does anyone have any questions? All of you that raised your hands before, this is the time. This is the time to bombard us.
You can go ahead and start answering the polling questions.
While we're doing that, yeah, definitely. And would anyone like for us to expand on some of the things that we've covered? Maybe you'd like a little bit more information. And this is where you can use your star pound, or you can use the chat pod on your left-hand side.
And we will be sending out a webinar summary to all those those who registered and participated. This will also be available on the Alumni WorkNet Workforce Professionals Pathway, as well as the Business Pathway that Juana had mentioned.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We also have want to put together a guide that all the materials will be available in the webinar summary, but we can go back to the introduction page at the end if you want to go ahead and download those if you haven't already had the opportunity to download the PowerPoint that was used today, as well as the guide.
Yeah. And I'm going to just switch over for a second. I'm not sure if it seems like there aren't any questions. Just to give you an idea as well with some of the things that we were talking about is I'm going to put up my works cited page, because obviously I didn't reinvent the wheel here. And so as Dee was mentioning, Mashable.com is the go-to place, I would say, for social media, anything. Two articles that I included was Social Media for Business, Do's and Don'ts of Sharing. And this is actually, a lot of that was used in our previous webinar as well. And then how to measure social media. And I highly recommend you check out Oliver Blanchard's video. Very, very cool, very easy to understand. It really breaks it down for you. And so obviously we don't have the time to cover that within the hour. The last part for those, and this is all based on the way you learn, but the last thing I included was a video. And so you can go ahead and view the social media video on. And so she's no longer at ECC, so good to know. We'll definitely have to reach out to Sarah. Actually, I would be very interested in getting her involved with us as well and coming back and giving some of her feedback. So I'm going to switch over back to the Q&A, give you another minute or so. And actually maybe just by a raise of hands. Is everyone good to go? If you're good to go, we can just all raise our hands and we can be done with the webinar. If not, or clap, yeah. I know everybody's very anxious to get on with their Fridays and move on.